sermon title today is How to Actually Make America Great Again. So I'm going to ask you to do something right as we start. I want you to repeat after me. I'm leaving my agenda at home. Repeat that. Now, if you're online watching us, type that down in the comment line. Just a thumbs up. Let us know that you agree with us. But I want, in the service here, I want you to do it again. But this time, say it like you mean it. Can we do that? I'm leaving my agenda at home. One more time. This is not about politics. This is about Jesus. We're here this morning because of a man who gave his life on a tree 2,000 years ago. So this morning, I don't care if you're Republican, I don't care if you're Democrat, leave it at home. Because this is about Jesus. What do you love most about America? I want you to think on that for a moment. What do you love most about America? Now, I would submit, actually, that you love America and what you love most is probably something you've not even thought about in a while. You definitely not thought about it in a church service. And I bet you've not even prayed about it recently. But maybe we should be praying about it all the time. What I believe that we love most about America is called the Bill of Rights. How many of you remember the Bill of Rights from the time you were a sophomore in high school? That's the last time I read them, when I had that test. I regurgitated the information and I was done, right? Do you understand most countries don't have anything like the Bill of Rights? That's the name that's given to the first 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution of the United States. They guarantee our personal rights and our personal freedoms. And so you maybe haven't thought about that Bill of Rights for some time. Let me just refresh your memory. Let's look at these Bill of Rights here. What are they? Yeah, they're the free speech and assembly. That's why we're here today. The right to bear arms. The idea of housing soldiers, the idea of search and seizure, life, liberty, and property, due process, jury trial, cruel and unusual punishment, undelegated powers kept by the states and people, guaranteeing our personal freedoms and our personal rights. And that 9th amendment that the forefathers gave us was this: the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Just means that, there are some other personal rights too. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just a few of them. If we were to rewrite the Bill of Rights today, I think it'd be a little different, wouldn't it? I think the 9th Amendment would be really different. See, I think if we rewrote the Bill of Rights today, we would say, we have the right to free Wi-Fi. Okay, where's my young people? Yeah, I hear some amen out there, right? You young people, that's what you want, right to Wi-Fi. A little more serious. Again, we left our agendas at home, okay? The agendas are at home. But we'd probably say something, we have the right to a free college education. Or we have the right to free health care. I'm just saying, if we wrote things today, they would look a lot different than what they wrote 200 years ago. And I think if we rewrote the 9th Amendment in particular, it would go something like this: I have the right to do what I want, when I want, and with whom I want, as long as it doesn't interfere with anyone else's 9th Amendment. Right? Our culture and society today is, I will do what I want, when I want, with whom I want. Because that's how we think as Americans today. And that's just what I'm going to call AA. Now, most of you hear the AA, you think of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is actually American arrogance. That's just the way we think. We have within us, just because we're American, this arrogance that we have, that we've got to get rid of. I'm an American. I'll do what I want, with whom I want, and when I want. I'll spend my money how I want. I don't really care or think too much about what someone else wants or needs. And there's a major problem with that. How many of you were parents or are parents? Every single parent knows this. If you're not a parent, talk to somebody who was a parent, you'll get it real quick. Because parents understand this intuitively. If you give someone a whole bunch of personal rights and there are no personal responsibilities paired with those rights, things go upside down in a hurry. Right? How many of you had a curfew when you were growing up? Had a curfew? Yeah, I did. And I couldn't wait. When I turned 16 and I got my license, I was allowed to stay out till 11 o'clock. Okay, you're laughing now, man. That was great back then. Right? That's staying out till 11 o'clock. My first time to have the car and to be out with a curfew at 11 o'clock, I got home at 11:04. My mom and dad was always in bed by 10 o'clock and sound asleep, right? I walked in the house, and there sat Dad in his recliner. And I thought, well, no big deal. 4 minutes, no big deal. He looked at me, and he said, you couldn't handle it, could you? Couldn't handle what? Couldn't handle the responsibility you had of being home on time. So from now on, you're not allowed to stay out till 11 o'clock. You got to be in by 9 o'clock. Ouch. You know, and then there was another time when I came in, I was way past curfew. Okay, we're not going to get into where or why, but we were way past curfew. And I come in the house and he was still awake. And that time I didn't have that privilege for a month. No car for a month. Just because I didn't come in on time. I had the right, but I didn't take the responsibility. And folks, we have a whole culture of that right now, where people do not want to take responsibility. We want the rights, but we don't want the responsibilities. Individual rights must be paired with individual responsibility. Joan and I were foster parents in our younger years, and we had a young foster daughter. Her name was Lillian, who has now given us 4 grandchildren and some great-grandchildren. And Joan just spent some time with them here not long ago. But Lillian, when she was a teenager, she wanted those rights. She thought she earned those rights. She thought she was entitled to those rights. Well, she was so much entitled to those rights that we screwed her windows shut, right? We locked the doors. We did everything in the world to keep her in the house because her right was, I'm going to crawl out the window and go do what I want. She did that one night, and she came home. Her room was in the basement, and she thought, I need to slip in the back door, go right down the stairs. They won't even know I left. I learned from my father. I was sitting in my recliner, and she just about died. And for the next several weeks, she thought she was dead because she went nowhere. Folks, that's rights and responsibilities. They go hand in hand. We need to understand that. We've got to have both. There's a thing here I want you to hear. Liberty without responsibility actually undermines liberty. Liberty without responsibility actually undermines liberty. When there is liberty and no responsibility, eventually liberty devours itself. Which leaves me with a question. We have a Bill of Rights, right? Why don't we have a Bill of Responsibilities? Think about that. Because I did this week, as I was preparing, I thought, why didn't they, the forefathers, have enough insight to include responsibilities with the rights they gave us? And so I did a little research. The reason we have the Bill of Rights and no Bill of Responsibilities is that the guys who wrote the Constitution, our founding fathers, every time they wrote something, they just assumed there were moral guardrails in place in all of society. And those moral guardrails pretty much covered this need for personal responsibilities. They just assumed we all had them. And it made sense back when they wrote that, didn't it? They had just come through a Revolutionary War. There was a deep sense of liberty, a deep sense of personal responsibility. There was a synergy around the moral code. I'll take care of my neighbors. They don't need to worry. And you see them, individual expression was governed and tied to a concern that was about other people. They actually thought, instead of, well, it's my right, they thought how it's going to affect the community, how it's going to affect the family, how it's going to affect my neighbors. Last night was a great example of that for me, with the fireworks going off and the music blasting. They didn't care what it did to the neighbors, right? Personal responsibility cares about what's happening on around me, what's happening to the people around me. They knew, our forefathers knew, that their individual rights were not just about me. The best example in American literature about this idea of personal responsibility, this divine accountability, is found in the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. And it reads like this: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." You see, they just had this idea. Their thinking was, it should be self-evident to us, because it should be written on our hearts, and we're not going to ignore it when we hear it and see it. And our rights are not given to us by government laws, are they? Our rights are given to us by God. They didn't think, back in those days, and the forefathers, they didn't think that everyone had to be a Christian. I don't think that today either, although as a preacher, I would love to have that, right? But that's not what they were saying. See, they were saying that we are all accountable to God for how we live our life, how we exercise these rights and these liberties that we have, how responsible and accountable we are. John Adams, our second president, apparently one of the very few who never owned a slave. He's a very unique guy in American history. He said this: "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Wow. True? We're seeing it, aren't we? True. In other words, if there's no consensus around the idea that there has to be some sort of divine accountability to the one who's written it on our hearts and in our minds, then this experiment that we call America is going to fail. If we just give individual rights and we don't have personal responsibility, the whole thing is going to devour itself. Sound kind of like where we are today? We see it happening all around us, don't we? Because what we have in our system today is a whole bunch of people clamoring for their rights, clamoring for their freedom, their personal preferences, not the group preferences, but my personal, individual preferences supersede anything else. And what's happening right now, there's a lot of collisions going on. And when rights collide, the courts decide. When rights collide, courts decide. The courts decide, like, I'm going to get a lawyer, right? You ever heard anybody say that? Well, if you did this, I'm going to get a lawyer. It's all around us. The litigation is crazy. But we need to understand that was never the intent of the forefathers. That's not why we have the Constitution. That's not why we have the Bill of Rights. Because if this is our system for living, and it's our central belief about government, and who we are as a nation, and what we have to do to create, folks, if it's going to be that way, listen, we just got to create law after law after law after law to cover anything and everything that is going on in our society. And how are we ever going to win or to set up a society that doesn't fall to pieces when you have all these laws going on? And actually, sometimes what we do is even worse. Because we do what we do. Every time that there's a law written, what do people try to do? What are you looking for when you find a law you don't like? A loophole. I want a loophole. It doesn't apply to me. I'm above that law. It doesn't include me. There's got to be a loophole in there for me. You can't penalize me because of that. My lawyer and I disagree with that law. And that's what people think. They can get away with it. Now here, I'm glad we have laws. All right? I think we got more laws than we need, but laws are needed. Here's the problem with the law. The law only represents a minimum requirement in life. The law is about how low can I go? How low can I go? That's the truth of law. A law tells us how low we can go. It's about how flexible the line is. How close to that line can I get? Can I step over it just a little bit and not get punished and still be okay? How far can I push? I mean, it's all around us. My favorite example, you've heard it many times, 465. Speed limit is what? Come on, do you even know what the speed limit is? It's 55. I want to see the hands of the people in this room, and if you're online, you put it in the comment box, that you actually drive 55 every time you're on that street, on that road. Every time. You've never broken 55. Oh, let me get mine down. Because mine's not up either. Right? So if I can go 60, I won't get pulled over. Maybe if I can go 64, may not get pulled over. 67, ooh, that's pushing it. But if I get pulled over and I don't get a ticket, that's okay. So I can go 67. If I get pulled over doing 70 and he doesn't throw me in jail, I'm good with that. You know, that's kind of how it is. We push the limit. That's how flexible is it? You see a problem with that, with the law? It just tells us how low we can go. How much can we abuse it and get away with it? You see, the law cannot do what it actually matters most in life, right? It's powerless. It's powerless to inspire greatness. It's powerless to inspire excellence. And it's powerless to inspire virtue. We can't legislate those things. And ultimately, the job of the law is not to do that anyway. Here's what I believe about the law. We have rights, individual personal rights, regulated by laws. Does that make sense? We have individual rights that are regulated by laws. And when we think about it at first, well, that's not so bad. Let me take you a little deeper with that. If you have a culture where the rights are regulated by laws, here's what you get. The rich rule the poor. Women are a commodity. Children are victims. If it's legal, then it's moral. Law informs the conscience, and everybody looks for the loophole. That's what happens with law. Pretty sad culture to live in, isn't it? Here's the killer part about that. I'm convinced. Let me say that I really hope that I'm wrong. I really do. But I'm probably not. I believe that our legal system, permanently detached from our sense of divine accountability and divine morality. Do you see that? Do you see that where our legal system is permanently detached from divine accountability and divine moral authority? The train has left the track or left the station and it's not coming back. And it's very, very sad. And this is a recipe for each and every American to be as selfish as we want to be. So folks, in the midst of this, how do we actually make America great again? How do we do that? Because we can do better than what we see, can we not? I'm not hearing anything. Can we do better? Yeah, we definitely can do better. While it's true that we're very separated as a nation and from divine morality and accountability, let me tell you this. There is hope. Please hear that. There is hope. But it's not in a political party. Understand that. Our political parties are so divided today and so out of touch with each other. It's crazy. It's so divisive in our culture right now. The political party is not going to do it. Let me tell you what else. Whoever sits in the White House isn't going to do it either. But whoever sits in this house just might. This is where it starts. If we want to make America great, it starts here. It doesn't start in the political arena. It starts in God's church with God's family. Folks, as you sit here this morning, you are the hope of the world. I mean, that's crazy that God has given us that opportunity. But He has. Did you know that an estimated 65% of people in America today still claim to be Christians? 65%. Think about that. I have a hard time believing the statistic, but as far as statistics go, it's a statistic, okay? So what it tells me is that our conduct as Christians has more potential to bring about more change than any law that anybody we elect. Because all the law can do is define how low we can go. And all the politicians are really supposed to do is to enforce the law and see how far it can go. I would say this to you this morning, that the only hope for us as a nation, the only thing that is going to take us to a better place is you and me. Doing what we are called to do. And here's how I know this. This is not, please understand, this is not just my opinion. I read it in a book. As a matter of fact, I read it in the book, right? The Bible. God has challenged us on this. See, so about 2,000 years ago, a guy by the name of Paul, we know him as the Apostle Paul. He's responsible for writing about half of the books of the New Testament, actually. And he's usually writing letters to different churches that he helped start to kind of help them through some issues that they're with. And so he's writing to this church in Galatia. In the Bible, it's called the book of Galatians. And these are Gentile Christians. And he's saying that you have some confusion as Gentiles. You see, some of the Jewish Christians are telling you that since they had to follow those 600 laws of the Old Testament, then now that you've accepted Christ, you got to be a Jew first, and you got to follow those 600 laws too. And Paul says, oh, time out. A little confused about that. Paul says, you don't need to go back and be a Jew first and then become a Christian. You don't need to do that. He says, you just follow Christ. You're a Christian. Brand new living. You have a brand new way of pursuing freedoms. You have a brand new way of responding to the love of Christ. But you know what most of us tend to do? We tend to use those freedoms for our personal gain and our personal pleasure. It's kind of like when you first got your driver's license and Dad handed you the keys. And you sit down in the driver's seat and you notice for the very first time that speedometer says you can go 150 miles an hour. You get in the car. Mom and Dad aren't in there with you. Nobody can see you when you get out on that backcountry road, right? So let's just go see how fast it'll go. That's kind of how we act. That's kind of what we do. Okay, let's do this. How many of you have ever touched wet paint? How many of you read the sign that says wet paint before you touch the paint? That's the way we are. It's absolutely crazy that we do those things. Paul says, wait a minute. He says, you can do better. Folks, how we respond to our freedoms as Christians is a game changer. Not just for us personally, not just for our church, but for the kingdom of God, for our local community, possibly even our whole country. And he makes a statement that's so relevant for you and me today. If you have your Bibles, open Galatians. Galatians chapter 5, verse 15. I'm sorry, verse 13 we'll start. Galatians 5, beginning verse 13. You, my brothers, were called to be what? Free. Called to be? Free. Oh, come on, we got to get louder than that. Called to be? Free. Thank you. But do not use your freedom to indulge in the sinful nature. How are we to use our freedom? We are to serve one another in love. That's what our freedom is for. To serve other people. In other words, stop asking, where's the line? How far can I go? How low can I go? Is there a law against it? Folks, listen, that's the wrong question to ask. This is so powerful. Imagine if every single Christian would do this just for one day. How would the world change? How would the world change? If we served each other humbly, as Paul says, in love, how would it change the world? There's no law or government official that can make you do that. It's a choice. It's a choice. God's called us as believers to make that choice. To serve one another humbly in love. To use the freedom that God has given us to serve others. We have that opportunity to make a difference. And then Paul quotes something from Leviticus as he goes on in Galatians. He quotes from Leviticus in the Old Testament. And it's also something that Jesus said. And it's the entire theme of Christianity, right? Verse 14, for the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. So here's my question. Instead of getting up in the morning and going, I'm free. I can spend my money on what I want. I can do what I want, live how I want. Why don't we get up tomorrow morning and say, man, I'm free today. How can I serve others today? How can I love people best today? Folks, if we woke up and wife said, how can I best serve my husband and my family today? Because you're being taught just the opposite from the culture with the feministic society that we're in. What if we woke up as students and we said, hey, how can I serve my teacher today? Brown nose. That's what the kids would say, wouldn't it? If you tried to serve your teacher, you used a brown nose. Yeah. How about as an employee? What if you got up and you said, how can I serve the people around me at work today? How can I serve my boss today? Imagine just one single day when every Christian in America did that. What would happen? Well, we wouldn't need any laws that day, would we? Wouldn't need those. Because instead of how low can I go, how can I get, we're going to be saying, how can I change this mentality? And we'd be looking up and saying, how good can I be? How can I love others? How can I treat others best today? Some of you are looking at me right now, and I just know what you're thinking. That is so ridiculous and silly. That'll never work. The sad thing is, you're right. But as believers, folks, that's Christianity 101. That's how we should be living every day. Shouldn't be something we're challenged with. It should be the way that we live. That's the basics of following Jesus. And that's as basic as it gets. But Paul doesn't stop there. After he quotes Leviticus, he moves on and he gives a warning in verse 15. If you bite and devour each other, watch out, or you will be destroyed by each other. If you forget or fail to leverage your personal rights for the sake of other people, people on the outside coming in and hurting us, no. We'll be just like a bunch of dogs biting and devouring each other. When it's all about you, you will destroy you. In 2001 in America, we were all freaked out by terrorism, weren't we? After 9/11. That was our number one concern. People on the outside coming in and destroying America. That's where we were. That's what was happening. But listen, there's a much greater concern that we should be focusing on today, because the greatest threat to America is not terrorists, it is us. It's Americans. Abraham Lincoln, one of my favorite men in the world. And I think he was even a prophet, because he said this: America will never be destroyed from the outside. If we falter and lose our freedoms, it will be because we destroyed ourselves. We are the greatest threat to ourselves. We are our own greatest enemy. This is not the stuff on the outside. Because when we undermine our own liberty by focusing on ourselves, our liberty that we're so passionate about, so grateful for, will devour itself. We have more rights than any other nation in history. And I think we still live in the greatest country in the world, even with everything that's going on. I believe we're still the greatest country in the world. But apart from a moral compass, this great country that we live in, that we love so much, is going to be destroyed by us. Scripture tells us that only the church can change that. It's not about being unified in a voting block. I really don't care who people vote for. We need to be unified in the obedience block, obeying the Scriptures, being unified around the Bible, being obedient to what God has called us to do, being passionate about loving God and loving people and making disciples. That's what we're about. We're called to make a difference, not a point. I want you to hear that again. We are called to make a difference and not a point. So let's just talk about, very quickly, some applications for us to do if we want to help to actually make America great. The first thing we need to do what is just, not what you can justify. Do what is just, not what you can justify. Stop asking, how low can I go? Where's the line? Instead asking, how high can I reach? What can I do while I'm up there? Shock your co-workers when you go into work tomorrow and say, hey, everybody, I'm here to help. How can I help you today? Now, once you pick their jaws up off the floor, they'll appreciate it, because they're going to look very puzzled at you. What'd you just say? Yeah. Why? Because they hear it so infrequently. Got to say that. Do it at home. Do it with your family. Do it here at church. Why would I do that? Because it's exactly what God did for us. He looked down. He saw this sin-focused, sin-saturated world, and he said, what can I do to help? How can I help these people? And then he did what he deemed necessary. He served us humbly in love by sending his one and only Son to die on the cross for you and me. Do what is just, not what I can justify. Number 2, do what is responsible, not what is permissible. Stop thinking about what can I get by with, and start thinking about what's my responsibility. You know, and check it out. If you're not willing to take full responsibility for every potential action, decision, or word you say, any step that you take, then don't take that step. Don't make that decision. Don't act in that way. If you're not willing to take responsibility, then don't do it. Pretty simple. I want us to say something again together this morning. And you online, I want you to comment for us if you would. But I want you to say this: that is my responsibility. Can you say that? Let me hear you. That is my responsibility. Okay, one more time and you got to mean it. That is my responsibility. How often do you hear that in daily conversation? Oh, I'm sorry, that was my responsibility. That don't happen, right? But that's what it is. We got to do what is responsible and not permissible. Number 3, do what is moral and not what's modeled today. We got to stop taking our cues of morality from CNN and NBC and all the news around us. We're already paying dearly for the mentality that says it's a dream, it's not reality. I can do what I want with who I want, whenever I want, as long as it's not illegal. Forget the immoral part. They don't care about that. As long as I don't directly hurt somebody else, that's okay. Because you see, we're being told there are no consequences. And that's a lie. As a matter of fact, that's a lie straight from the pit of hell, folks. Because there are always consequences. Sometimes we just don't see them. But it'll cost. Sometimes it costs us. And we see when it costs us, then we know there are consequences. But you know, there are times when we don't see it. And the consequences happen to my family. The consequences happen to my church. The consequences happen to the friends in my circle. But here's the thing we got to understand. Most importantly, it will cost our witness and influence on people who are looking to find Jesus, and they're looking to us to find him. Folks, if you're here this morning and you're a believer, I'm telling you straight up, God has already called us to live a certain way. All the answers are in the book. We just got to read the book. We've got to live how he's called us to live and do what he's called us to do. Part of his promise is that we are better as people, but we'll also be better as a nation. Anointing should bleed out of our lives into everybody around us. Tony Evans, Jesus needs to come out of your pores. I love that. And it starts with us. To make America great again, it starts with us. And here's where it starts. Honor God. Honor God. Every time you make a decision, you take an action, ask yourself, will this honor God? Here's the thing about that question. We know it intuitively. You see, Jesus always honored God in every decision and action. You remember a few years back, we had those little bracelets we wore? What did they have on them? Oh, you do remember those. WWJD, right? What would Jesus do? We know what Jesus would do. We needed the bracelet that had WIDI on it. Will I do it? It's not a matter of knowing it. It's a matter of doing it. We know that answer. And the preamble tells us that. It is self-evident. I love that. We know because he's written it on our hearts. And it points us back to the fact of the Bill of Rights, assumed accountability of God. Folks, we can do this. We can do this. But 12 men turned the world upside down. Okay, now I'd have to take my shoes off to get to 12. But I can count each of you today, and there's a few more than 12 out here. We should be able to turn our community upside down, if not the whole world, because of who we are and what we can do. Imagine what it'd be like if everyone decided just for 1 week to live that way. What difference would we see?